All right, let's start the panel. I have the panelists, Steve, Paweł, and Anita. Thank you. And the title of the panel is AI in DevEx. And we want to talk about the landscape changing. So the topic of the whole meeting today is, developer experience versus developer productivity. And it's a bit about, a difference between quantity, maybe, and quality of what we produce. But I think it's not this simple. I think one affects the other, and also the changes in technology, they affect how we change, how we work. So it's a co-evolution, basically, of what's happening. And so I want to talk with you a little bit about the current status of the tools of how AI helps us even today. Then a little bit about the future, speculate a little bit where we can go, but also how the team dynamics change, how that affects the team. So let's maybe start from the...
Introduce yourself.
That's a good point. My name is Zbigniew Skolicki, and I work at Virtus. It's a pleasure to host this panel. I work as AI engineer, and data engineer also a little bit. Okay, so coming back to the questions. So IDEs. Let's start simple, right? We have IDEs helping us with producing code. And okay, we can use chat-oriented programming, as Steve mentioned. We can, have code completion. We can pin the context. So various helpers like that. What do you think can be the next step in IDEs? Right? What do you think the IDEs should? What should be developed in IDEs next so that it's most helpful? Is it about generating more code, or is it maybe about things around generating code? So maybe like genetic documentation, testing, or maybe some additional code reviews, maybe automatic reviews, things like that.
All right. Well, so I think that my answer to the question would be, so the question being, what would be the next thing you would add to IDEs to boost our productivity, right? Basically, what's the next big thing? I would say it's the next 5 things are going to be terrible agents, bad agents, okay agents, acceptable agents, and good agents. And maybe 1 year per, right? It's all going to be agents.
Okay.
As I am the experience advocate, I would add here that the more context about users and the software you build, from that point of view, data, documentation, and everything would be just nice.
Yeah, the question was about the direction, but I think if we look at what happens right now, I think they already, sort of the transition is happening. So there was multiple times, on these presentations was said about, Steve mentioned about these code completion, and then there was these IDE, right, the sort of the next steps. And I think when we talk about these tools like Cursor, like Windsurf, like I think Tray, Pair AI, there's a bunch of these things that are happening right now. What I'm still lacking is that, first of all, I think they do absolutely marvelous work. Like, for the person like me, who is not doing the coding every single day, I finally have this feeling that someone built it for me. Like, because if I were an engineer who would be doing, work in a big system every day in, day out, it's probably have, you have a lot of this tooling, a lot of the stuff already set up. Whereas when you're doing, coding, for instance, like I do, from time to time, several hours during the week, and usually there are different aspects. What is extremely, my biggest problem in the past years was that, I had this 10 hours, for instance, during this week. And by the time I got to the actual problem, I already realized that I spent 10 hours or plumbing, setting up the environment, infrastructure, things like that, setting up some libraries, and all this plumbing. That was really not my problem. And I just realized that this problem has basically, it has been eliminated maybe not completely, but to a significant extent. What I'm thinking is, and what I see, what the big difference is in things like Cursor, and I think a Sourcegraph Cody might have a different angle because it goes to the, large code bases when you can index stuff, and those Windsurf and Cursor cannot do it. But what they can do today is integrate not only the, build the code based on your code as a code completion, or as you chat with it, but also can figure out, well, there is some error, I paste the error, it can analyze the error, it can change several different files depending on the IDE that you pick, like Cursor versus Windsurf, it can actually do it as a give you a review and say, I want to accept these changes or not, or can do it automatically. And I think the next near short-term step might be the integrating even more different aspects. I can run the application on test and it fails and automatically detects, oh, this test failed. It takes it from the console that is in the UI and suggests that it should be fixed like that. For now, what you do is basically take it, paste it, and do it still in IDE. So it's not a very big, there is no much impedance in it, but there's still some hassle that you need to go through. And I think, putting this in the more coherent and strive-forward experience would be interesting step forward that would, even more make it more effective.
Okay. So do you think the IDs can also go maybe one level up? Like in your graphs that you showed, for example, do you think it's possible that, they will start kind of judge the code that you write and give, analyze the design that you're doing? Maybe not at the very high level, right? But maybe at the level of a certain module, right? Because when you're thinking about code reviews, right? Like what Krzysztof said earlier, right? Some code reviews are very picky and so they're saying like, okay, change this variable name to something else, right? But then sometimes, hopefully, you get more deeper thoughts, saying like you have those two things connected and you shouldn't have, right? Things like that. Do you think IDs can start suggesting things like this and saying like, you're using this pattern wrong? Or maybe you ask an ID to do something and the ID says, don't do that, right? So do you think any of this, are we gonna get anything like this soon?
I mean, my short answer before I pass the mic to someone else is that I think this already is being done. The question is, what is the quality of it being done? Yes, sure, it's done poorly, suboptimally. It could be done better by person, but by human. But if you think about key functionalities that IDEs usually have is code completion, generating some testing, generating some documentation, and the last one, analysis of your code, which is basically what you said. And it can suggest some changes. And you can argue that, well, it's not that good. Sure, the more complicated code base, the bigger it is, the more proprietary it is. Like if you have a small library that's based on open source, it would be more effective. If it's a big tech organization with millions of lines of code, less effective, but maybe Cody would help with that in the future, or maybe fine-tuning some other models. But I'd argue that the thing is there. The quality needs to improve. But the whole, the general idea is already there. And in many cases, it works well.
Okay.
Yeah, just to build on what Paweł said, because I agree with that. LLMs are fundamentally lacking sort of puppeteering capabilities, right? They need to be able to actually do the changes, that they're suggesting. And so I think today, Paweł's right. I mean, like LLMs can absolutely help you with some of those higher level, or I should say not higher level, just more annoying, setup environment stuff, right? They can, but they can't do it for you today. And that's why I said it's going to be agents, because really it's all about automation. I mean, all DevEx is automation of stuff that we don't want to do by hand, right? In a sense. So I think that IDEs become a focal point for that, right? Because they have the ability to talk to all of the other systems. And today agents can, they can go on the web and they can do web searches because that's really, pretty trivial. Manipulating an IDE, is a lot more complicated. So I think it'll be a while before we see it, but not long because IDEs are not going away.
Thanks. All right, so listening to your talk, Anita, we learned that service can tell us a lot about the quality of the code. Right? You can have hundreds, you said, different measures, but at the end, you need to ask developers, whether the code is good, whether the tech depth exists or not, as far as I understood, right?
If it slows down or
If it
works.
slows down, yeah, okay. So once we start to auto-generate more and more and more of the code, right? There are things that developers can see, but the current AI assistants cannot, right? What are those things? Why can the developers see through and say, okay, this tech debt will slow us down, and why is AI blind to it, right? Like what are those patterns that are still reserved for the developers and for the humans? Can we comment on that? What's your thought?
So when I was thinking from, of course, the perspective of the experience, what might be the differences between developers writing a code now and AI writing a code now, I thought that, like, AI as it is right now, it was built as a chat, right? So it's very, very good in short forms, like answer, we ask, we get the response. But the longer the form is, the worse results we get, right? There was a project, or we have the auto-generators, AI auto-generators for books. Like, we have 5 AI agents, one responsible for designing and writing about characters, another one about the story we would like to tell, another one is just writing the chapters. And it's not very good in that. So you read the whole book, it's about the taste Steve mentioned. Like what the taste is, right? Right now, the AI agents writing a book are writing books that humans don't want to read. And there are some patterns there maybe we can learn from. The first one is positivity bias. So the characters, they are, they do not have the sad stories or unexpected experiences. The other one is that it is misleading in terms of what part of the story should be explored and which one should be just ended. And when you read this book, it's really, from your experience, it's, oh gosh, why am I reading that, right? It should be about a different part of the story. And that's the next one. And the third one is when you read those books, it's about, it's at the maximum I could rate it as below the average. When I read a book written by AI agents. And I was thinking about that. What's the difference when an AI is writing a code and a senior developer is writing a code in terms of experiences? And I would say that the experiences of an AI are fragmented. It's here, it's now. But the experiences of a developer writing a code, there's a continued experience from the past 20 years. Thousands of hours of coding, many lessons learned, a lot of shortcuts taken. Some were a success, others were a failure. And there is also a future. When a developer is writing a code, he or she is thinking about the future. If I write this code this way, I will be in trouble in a week. Or if I put an extra effort right now, there will be a good experience in a month or so. So it's a very practical judgment, I would say, about how it is right now, how it can be in the future, and how it was in the past, like continued experience. And it's the same in the surveys and what Google found out. when they ask developers about the technical debt, they are not answering the simple question, how it is right now, but they have many other layers of thinking about the technical debt. What is good enough, how it could be, what's the ideal state. So many other, I would say, layers of how they are thinking about it.
So it's basically seeing beyond the code and understanding the context.
And maybe that's a little bit what the TASE is about.
So I don't know if you want to add something or...
I can't add anything to that brilliant answer.
All right. So this leads to my next question, which is AI can help not only with writing code, but it can actually help us create applications, right? Like as a whole, right? It can help us, there are different aspects, right? We can look at the conceptualization, but we can also look at things like, performance. We can look at things like building the basic code, but we can also look at the infrastructure that needs to be built around, right? I'm not actually very familiar, and so maybe I'll ask you. What is the current state of this support, right? Is it better? Is it worse than like simple code assistance? Do we have, there was this Devin, right? But it turned out it didn't work that much. Where are we in this aspect?
I think I missed the very beginning of the question, so...
Sure. So I said, apart from AI assistants just to help with writing code, we can have AI assistants that can generate all things around the code, right? So to build the whole application from end to end, basically, right? From maybe from scratch even, right? So design to architecture to implementation to optimization and so on. Where are we with this more bigger, let's say, agents that can assist with these aspects?
Got it. Thank you. So, okay. Actually, I'm going to hand it over to Paweł while I compose my thoughts.
Sure.
Sure. I can be, a filler here. So, there was this, I think recently there was this, not a study, but more of a more thorough test. I don't remember what was the company. There was this think tank about AI research lab, and they validated, they tried to verify the results made by Devin. Because when Devin was announced, they claimed that it has spectacular results, and they tried to reproduce it on starting from relatively complicated topic to simpler, and simpler. And basically the long story short is that, I think 8.5, because one of these was half success, 8.5 tasks that they gave it failed without any result whatsoever. They said one was so-so and the one was successful. So I think like my impression today is that it's, the quality is not, and the usefulness is not very high, but you can already see the glimpse of something interesting to come. And there's like the product, for instance, Lovable, and there's probably shitloads of those products right now that generally can build the whole application for you. That's what they claim. And we try to do it, and you can even be somewhat sophisticated with what you want to achieve. And it creates something for you. And most of the time is nearly there, but not quite, right? And it's like you couldn't use it for, like my impression was, you couldn't use it for any professional, real, serious, use case. Like in a big organization, you need to do all those security constraints, compliance, whatsoever, integrations. But if I wanted to have a quick, sort of a demo that I would show customer, well, that might actually work. And we would talk about it, and it would be better than having this written or sketched on a sheet, virtual sheet of paper. Maybe better than design, like in Figma somewhere, because it's sort of actionable. You can do something, and you can generate it in minutes. Sure, maybe you need to try a couple of times. As I said, it's like it's not perfect, but I saw the glimpse. the glimpse of something that might be interesting, like the promise.
That's a good insight. They're bad today, and it's easy to look at that and laugh them off, right? But we're on an exponential curve, so they're going to get better, right? I think that probably the most important concept at work here that I'd love for all of you to take away, and I forgot to talk about it during my talk, is context. Okay, LLMs are really well trained and they're smart, but they don't have any context at all. They don't know anything about you or what your problem is or what your code base looks like or where your docs are or who your network admin is. They don't know any of that stuff, right? And the big companies are, of course, very, very complicated, right? So the game outside of AI, in AI, they're trying to make the models better, right? But the game outside of AI is to try to make the context better. That's what RAG is for, Retrieval Augmented Generation, which is basically go look in a database or a search engine for some extra, data to improve the context. It's where small models come in, where they may be, training on your workflow and learning that you typically go over to this unit test, suite in order to get sample code and things like that. But basically, like, when you hear this statement, context is king, it's almost an understatement. Because talking to an LLM is like calling somebody in a call center around the world, right, who's super brilliant, but you're talking to them over a phone. They can't see your computer, right? So, the context windows get larger for putting context in. You can dump 2 million tokens into Gemini. The context output windows, which are really restrictive right now, they can't generate a whole book. You have to do it a section at a time, right? Those will get bigger too, but I mean, in the end, your code base and the data that you have, the intellectual property assets that you have that an LLM could look at potentially and help you with in some way, which is kind of almost all of it, is going to be gigabytes to terabytes to petabytes of data, right? And that's way bigger than any context window will ever be. So this is a really difficult game, and it's the reason that the agents are so bad right now. It's because they're operating without all of the proper context. So as that gets better, I think these will get better.
Okay, thanks.
By the way, maybe the solution is like we talked about this earlier about DeepSeek. And allegedly, like we know that DeepSeek requires less resources to be run. Allegedly, it requires less resources to be trained. Well, it's probably requires less resources. The question is whether, really, that much fewer resources than they claim. But if that's true, eventually, maybe like the answer for this petabytes of data and something like that, maybe you can, post-train the model or for big organization like big bank, that's probably doable, right? You don't need to do RAG or something like that. You can post-train all the data that you have. And maybe in some future, maybe you can do it periodically, like every month or something like that, updated with the up-to-date knowledge. Imagine that you have a large code base, right? Something like that. So, I don't think that it's unrealistic to expect that it might happen at some point.
But don't try that at home. It's actually, fine-tuning is a huge, huge difficult problem right now. The data will be, if you do it every month, then, the lookup engine will always be a month out of date, on your logs and all that. At Google, when this all first happened, because I have a lot of friends at Google still, they were saying that basically they told everybody, go fine-tune models, right? Go fine-tune a model to do your work. And everybody tried it. And it was just a complete wasted effort for months and months. Nobody could do it. So I think fine-tuning sort of kits will become available. They're starting to become available. But it's only one solution in your tool chest, and RAG will never, ever go away because you will always have local context that no search engine knows about.
Okay. Speaking about the code still a little bit. So once those tools are more and more common, right, we'll start to generate more and more code and will interact more and more through the agents. Does it mean we will start to care less about the actual code? Because we will, developers will actually stop working with the code itself. They will all the time work with the agents. So, who cares what, how the code is written? And does it mean that, we can get to a situation where there'll be, different style of writing code, more useful for the generation, for the analysis automatically, and ultimately maybe all different kinds of layers of abstractions that we've built over years when we tried to make coding easier for people, right? Maybe maybe this will not be needed anymore. Maybe, the agents can write in machine code, in assembly, right? And we just talk to the agents. And do you think that's a possible situation, or will we not let?
I think there might be one risk that at the end of the road, you probably will need to ask some human to find a bug if your machines are not going to solve this problem. And you might hit the wall when no one would like to do that or will be able to do that.
Okay, but even currently, if you compile code, nobody looks in the compiled.
Yeah, because I think there are two questions there. Whether there would be developers won't be looking and understanding the code, and whether the format of the code itself would change because there would be no need for developers to understand. And I think for the first question, it's sort of close to what Steve was mentioning about one of these answers to questions about black boxes. Black boxes are good. I remember these, there's every now and then discussion comes about, and usually related to, Ruby or Python, like there's some SQL alchemy or entity framework, I think it's called in Ruby on Rails, basically that generates SQL without knowing SQL. And there are always people outrage coming, well, we will create a generation of people who don't understand SQL, and as soon as there would be real problem, they won't be able to debug it. And guess what? I think that most of us these days, if we really look down through all the libraries and stuff that we are working on, we wouldn't be able to, for the sheer size of it, understand it. That's one thing. And the other thing, we probably wouldn't even have the capabilities to understand every single aspects, of all the libraries that we use, and we still rely on them, on a daily basis. So I think that part, that people won't be able to understand everything, I think I'm seeing it already. Now, I don't know about the format, it's like whether it would change, because I understand your question that programming language has been starting from COBOL, which was deliberately created to mimic the human language. I think it was the programming language itself, third level programming languages were created to mimic sort of the language. And what you're saying, if I understand it correctly, is whether we change it again, maybe to machine form, because why would people need to understand it? For that, I don't know. It's far-fetched to me. I don't have any answer for this, to be honest.
So everything Paweł said, and also just skill atrophy in general is a real concern. People are like, oh my God, what if we forget, as developers how to do X, Y, Z? But, as Paweł pointed out, it's already happened, plenty of times. The Ruby on Rails example was a really good one, but I don't look at the assembly language that my compiler generates. Does anybody here look at the assembly language their compiler generates? You could. So, I think to your question, eventually, you're not going to have to look at the code that it generates. I think for the foreseeable future, 5 years, your developer skills are going to be super, super useful because you're going to need to go look at the code and go, oh, that's what it was doing, right? But at some point, I think truly as they get better and better, you do less and less of that. And eventually it comes down to trust and is it working well enough, right? Are your validations good enough, yeah? And I think we're all going to get there. It's going to be, it works well enough. I'm not going to look at the code this time. Scary.
Okay.
There's one more thing that I think is sort of the underlying assumption that we have in this discussion. We are assuming, and I think that when we ask this question, we have this context about what we call, quote unquote, real software development. Big companies some sort of performance constraints, legal constraints, things like true software development. You care about eventual consistency and whatnot. But if, I'm going to, take this number out of thin air. I think that, thin air meaning I've asked ChatGPT about it, and he told me, or it told me. So about 70%, between 60 and 70%, according to ChatGPT, very reliable source, but still 60 to 70%.
Plus or not plus?
Sorry?
You have a plus?
Yeah. So about 60 or 70% of code being created is for sort of applications like, maybe a web page in PHP with some automation. maybe, well, these days people don't do online shops because, Shopify does that, but they did that in the past. Maybe some small application written in Ruby on Rails, for instance, for some small company. Projects that takes 1, 2, 3, 4 months sometimes. They're not built for lasting 10 years. And I think when we talk about it, we try to measure the effectiveness and how it changes and how it affects and whether it's good enough for this big, hairy problem, which is, large, serious projects, whereas 60 or 70% of code being created in those large, in the small applications that pretty much are often throwaway applications. Someone creates it, this company, this agency, goes out, and the customer wants to get back to them to fix something 1 year later. Oh, well, sorry, company went out of business. They need to rewrite it from scratch. And that really happens. It happened to my wife when she wanted to create a web page. So if you think about it, that 60 or 70% code, if that's true, is created in such areas, that's a huge improvement. And maybe in those areas, you don't need really to that much understand the code because, well, probability is that in 2 years, no one will be reading it anymore. Maybe.
That was an awesome insight. I think that 60 to 70% goes to 99.99% as something remarkable happens that we haven't talked about. It's where I thought you were going, which is that everyone in this room will be able to write apps pretty easily in about 3 years or less, yeah? So we're going to have, 100 times or 1,000 times more apps. Just like TikTok is so different from having 7 channels on TV when I was a kid.
What's going to be the differentiator between those apps then? If everybody can write an app overnight.
Taste.
Okay.
And I just was thinking about it. Maybe we will have the new etiquette, like handmade code.
Or AI-free. I was thinking about it.
Organic.
Bio.
No, think in a way that would be like the insight also that Steve mentioned, like even if it's 60, 70%, it might really go to 90 to 99% because everyone could create something. Sure, that would be mostly crap, but let's be real and look at what you have on streaming. Like I'd say that 80% what is there is crap. People still watching it. I do from time to time. And it's like it's being created. There is a demand for it. And for companies that today, like if you have company, 10, 20 people, small shop, I don't know, selling something, they don't have money to have the application, custom application being created today or even 10 years ago. They could go and buy something off the shelf, but usually, well, not usually. Sometimes it works. Sometimes you need to, really bend it to make it work for you. And sometimes it's even more costly than writing it in a custom way. Generally, building software and customizing it is usually costly. Maybe if you could create even crap, but custom crap, maybe actually it would, in a way, democratize and make the software available for some small, companies that wouldn't be able to afford it today.
Okay, thanks. Maybe last question from my long list, and I hope maybe we'll have some more questions also from the audience. So the last question about the team dynamics, right? So once we start to write the code faster, or maybe even in a less predictable speed actually, right? But in theory it should be faster, and there should be a shift so that, product managers maybe are more, they have more work, right? And there is somewhat less work for the engineers implementing the code, right? So in the current teams, right, we have usually 1 PM and maybe 7 engineers, right, or something like that, right? Maybe in not such a distant future, well, these engineers will have to change the scope of their work, or we need to hire other people, but maybe we'll have like 3 PMs and 3 engineers, for example, in the team, right? Do you think that this will affect how we work, for example, in sprints, right? Or how we work, the iteration, basically, right? Because currently, it's very common to have, 2 weeks sprints, right? And we have some lists, some backlog, and some list of tasks that we want to do in a sprint, in the agile, right? Do you think this will change? Do you think we'll have to iterate, more often. But maybe then that's not good for humans, right? Because it's actually comfortable to have some time for doing things. So basically, how the using of AI more, how do you think this can affect the dynamics in the teams? Any thoughts on that?
So the first thing, it already changed, like engineers became managers of AI. Not humans, but they already have, the way you call it, it's up to you, padawans or sparring partners or any way you can imagine. They are already in another role. So this is something already changed.
So we'll all go one level up, right? The PM becomes Uber PM, and each engineer becomes the manager.
I don't know about that, but what I hope for, like you mentioned sprint. Sprint cycle is about trying to find out the best solution for business needs, right? We play the game, then we try to cut the work and specify it in smaller pieces. And then we are testing, and then we are trying to figure out if it works or not and learn. And I think that what we are talking about two kind of speeds or cognitive capacity. The one is the one that humans have. So how much time do I need as a team to solve a problem, to plan it, to align on it, to find the solutions? And the other one is, this is the speed of AI, your sparring partner that you are playing with to try to figure out this problem. So I don't know the answer, and I don't know if the answer exists, because the teams I'm working with, they are all working the ways that suits them. So they are choosing the time they need to just go through the cycle they defined.
This is just such a mind-expanding question, right? How are teams going to change? I think that your point about cycle times, it's all around cycle times. They've been getting faster ever since we started. Like, it's all about automation. And one of the Christophs was talking about how compilation speeds need to be down under second, Christoph. Under a second, yeah. And I think teams will follow, like, we will discover what team structures lead to the fastest, cycle times for getting features out. And it could well be, right, well, it's, the team, I thought it was really interesting that Anita brought up that the gating, the LLMs are fast. So what you're going to be gated on is coordination costs, right? I think probably I could actually see a team. Imagine a team of 5 people with an LLM that's talking. We're not typing. We're all talking to it, all right? And we're saying, all right, we're going to start our planning for the next project. Here's the context. And it goes, okay, right? That's probably like later this year, right? LLMs being able to recognize different people in conversations. And it's completely changed like the planning process. So it's really hard to predict what's going to happen. But I think to your point about PM to Eng ratio and things like that, I think those will change. Yeah. I don't know how, but it's going to, I think we're going to start seeing success stories from companies that, did these changes, and then people start copying.
Good.
I would like just add one thing to that. Like, when you prompt an AI with a specification, the assumption is you already have it in your mind. So very often the time needed is to build that in your human mind. And then the prompt, it can be just 1 second, right? But you need to figure out by your own what's the goal, what's the direction, what are the constraints, right? And then you just prompt, but you need the time to figure it out by your own.
So does it all mean that we'll have more meetings so that we can figure out what we want to do? And so we all become managers and we have more meetings?
Maybe not, because I think what you said, that was interesting, because you need to have the specification before you actually start prompting, right? Maybe not start, but eventually you got to have it in your head because you need to specify prompt. But the funny thing is, like, what is the alternative to that? And the alternative is pretty much the same, but slower. Like, imagine that you are this PM. And this is funny because there is this guy, Sahil Lavinja. He's the owner and founder of Gumroad. And he's, famous because he doesn't hire anyone. He has only, I think, contractors. So it's quite, contrary to typical, how you build the company. And yet his company is moderately successful, is known. And he said some time ago that according to his estimation, he gave some numbers. For developer, the speed up is 2x. For, QA, 4x. For designer, 5x. For PM, 40x. And I said, come on. Get real. It's like, you're not going to do 40 hours of work in 1 hour of, whole week in 1 hour if you are PM with the help of AI. So I subscribed to his, he was doing, I think, live or on X with that, or Twitter. And I got this, watched this recording. And the case that he was showing was, and that comes to, what you mentioned about the specification. In the past, what I had to do is I had this idea as a PM. And what I had to do is probably I had to have some designer who would sketch it for me. So I built the, sort of specification requirements. And he showed the document. Here's how it looks like. I gave it to a team of designers. They built something for me. Sometimes they weren't available just right now. So I needed to wait 1 day or something. They built it for me from this design. Some developer built, POC. And again, they were relying on the specification from the designer and myself. Then I got it and realized, well, that's not quite what I meant. Sorry, my mistake. I did the specification incorrectly. And they said, okay, yeah, fine, we can fix it. But when we are back to our task, we'll be back to you in 2 days. So when you think about that and about all those communications that are happening, and I just realized that, well, yeah, maybe the time of work is not decreased 40 times. I still think that he exaggerated, but that's, internet. You got to exaggerate a little bit. But still, there was some truth in this, the duration of the task might have been significantly, reduced because there were no these downtimes, no miscommunications. Or if there was miscommunication, you found it right away because PM could do it themselves. And then when he found out and went to the customer or to executive, show them, they clicked through that, discussed that, then it went to maybe to development team or designing team, whatever. But he could avoid all those hoops, in all the different teams. So,
okay. So the PMs will win most. So
maybe
to my children, I should let them do not learn coding, be a PM with a good taste, I guess. Yeah.
But you asked this question if programming is going to be more fun, or someone asked this, is it more fun or less fun? And I don't know. I truly think that programming is going to be more fun. Really, I know that there is some therapeutic, I'd say, benefits of writing the same code over and over again. But let's get real. Everyone who has several years of experience probably wrote similar stuff several times with some small, variations. Sure, there are new things that you build from time to time, but a lot of stuff is repetitive. And it's therapeutic to build it now and again, things that you could improve, but I think a lot of it could be, automated with the use of the tools, and in fact give you more, more fun in work and satisfaction.
Okay, that's good news. I want to ask any questions from the audience, either as a follow-up to what we discussed, or maybe as a follow-up to the talks earlier.
How to solve trust issue, both from probably development side and from the client side. I mean, if you want to adopt AI tools, right, and use it more, it may appear some trust issues both from team and from clients/stakeholders.
It's a great question. Absolutely. You can't make forward progress with AI without sort of establishing some level of trust. And, I talked a little bit about how validation and verification can help with that. But Gene, I think my co-author, Gene Kim, put it best. He said there's a trust fall involved, right? A trust fall. You have to basically take a plunge, say, I'm going to do this. Our organization may feel some short-term pain from it, right? But we're going to trust that we can get to the point where we can trust it.
Steve, what's exactly the title of the book that you're reading?
The CHOP Handbook.
Okay, CHOP Handbook.
I would add to this just one thing. Like, listen to your developers and listen to them about the pains they have, about the time wastes they experience, and start implementing AI exactly to remove the friction there. So if you want to build trust across developers, start with listening to them and applying the technology to things that are ugly for them in their work, instead of trying to implement it first to things they are thinking they are good at or are good at, right? So maybe that's the trick.
I just think it's funny that she jumped to the conclusion that the question was about developers, and I jumped to the conclusion that it was about leaders. And I think it has actually kind of a slightly different answer for both. So thank you for sharing that.
I think that also, sort of the other thing is, how do you build trust for anything, for any new invention? Usually with time, right? And it just, you first give it, or for a new technology that is just, emerging, like you give it some small task, perhaps peripheral, then a bigger one, and a bigger one. When it fails, you go step back. And eventually, the trust is there with time.
The catch here is, though, that, once you lose the trust, it's difficult to regain it, and we actually start low, right?
Yeah. I mean, there are probably shades of gray, so the trust is much more difficult to gain if you have a mission-critical system where especially, like, human lives depend on it, obviously. But, most of the systems is not that, right? Most of the systems are, in bank systems, you have more regulations, but there are a lot of other systems that, we are talking as if humans don't make mistakes. They do. And we live with that.
Thank you. Any more questions from the audience?
Maybe that will be a bit more philosophical question, but do you think we'll get used to interact with AI more than with people? Because at the end of the day, we would rather, at least myself, I would rather interact with people. And if I go shopping, I hate self-checkout machines. I'll always go straight to the manual line. And there might be some occasions where you really want to interact with people, and I find it odd in some cases, to be honest. And I'm not sure the barrier we can overcome quite easily. Of course, with time, maybe. So what's your take on this?
So the question is, how do we feel about having a bunch of robots around? I think we're going to have to get used to it. I don't know if you've seen the films, but robots are getting real good at doing stuff like folding laundry. And the OpenAI jobs report just came out. It's pretty impressive. I mean, they looked at all 20,000-ish jobs in the United States to see which ones would be impacted by AI, right, Gen AI. And something like 80% of jobs in the U.S. are affected by, it would cut their workload by 50%, right? So it's inevitable that it's going to happen, right? There's going to be a lot of people out there who are like, I want to talk to a human. So just like Anita's point about bespoke code, hand-authored, artisanal craft code, I think you're going to have like humans around that people can talk to.
Yeah, and also, again, some things, sort of in the same, vibe as the previous answer. I think that some things are due to your preferences because you can have a choice and maybe you would prefer to pay even more to do a human interaction. But sometimes you don't have a choice. Like, there was this, I think, question about, robotics. Like, would you like to have a robotic arm? Well, no, sure, I would like to have a natural arm. But if you don't have an arm, it probably can, maybe not save a life, but actually improve the quality of your life significantly. And if we think about, because we are going further into the future, if we think about, for instance, Japan, I think Japan has this problem that they have shortage of people. They have the, aging society, and they have the problem with people who would care about, elderly. So maybe that's one of the example of cases that your choice would be, I don't have anyone to care for me, because that's the situation, or I would have a robot with AI. Not perfect, but maybe better than nothing.
Also, if I can add, we'll probably have automation for everyday's work, right? But there's still going to be a niche for some work. So for this everyday work, will depend on perfectly done automatic ways of how robots can do it for us. But for some niche, maybe we would actually prefer handmade things, right? Like we do now with art or for example, thinking about a book, right? That you said, I would actually prefer to read a not perfect book, but wrote by a human, than a perfect book wrote by a computer, because if it's written by a computer, can I feel the author? Can I is it real? I think that's a distinction here.
I think it's a great point. I also think that we need to recognize that has a shelf life. I don't know if you guys heard Dario from Anthropic say that he said it's going to be a while before AIs are better than most humans at most tasks. They're probably not until 2026, 2027 is what he said. That's what a while is in AI terms, yeah? So if an AI is better than most humans at most tasks, you may well find that you find an AI that you prefer talking to this jerk over here that they just hired, right? I don't know, but I could see it happening.
Maybe in the last question, because I think the time is a little bit stretched already. In last question here, okay.
First of all, thank you for the discussion. And my question is, from my humble experience as a software engineer, I believe the most dangerous bugs that I have ever introduced were the most subtle ones, the ones that were indistinguishable from the correct code. And what do you think, given the fact that AI was trained to generate the code that looks most probable, what do you see, what are the top risks of the code written 99% of the time by AI, which is 99.9% correct?
Well, I guess, in general, the risks depend on the kind of the system. So, as I said, in the extreme case, human life might depend on it. But I guess the typical things, there are different things, sure. The same thing was with Stack Overflow. People, when they said, there is a Stack Overflow, there are some answers. And there was always some people complaining, you know what, the best, most upvoted answer is actually incorrect one. It seems like a correct one, it's subtly incorrect one. The thing was there already, right? And I think in a way, people are also trained, on the code they have, which isn't always, people work in the organization, they have some patterns, looks at some code, they are sometimes tired, sometimes don't pay attention. So I don't think in general that's the problem that we don't have. It's we already have this problem. The question is whether the scale will change, right? And I guess that at the very beginning, there could be, many more subtle bugs that are introduced. I guess with time, as with most, innovations that are, evolving, they would get decreased until a center point that the, percentage would be lower than typical, employee. But you asked about the risk. I think the one that is, two from the top of my head that people often quote is security, because many subtle bugs affect security. The other one, and that is related to all LLMs. And I'm not aware of the answer. I just think we'll just, get on with it somehow. Many people were complaining from the legal perspective that it's unclear what are the, proprietary rights of the generated code. And a legal risk is a risk, right? Especially for large organizations. I can give you an example that when I worked many years ago at IBM, you couldn't even use, libraries that were openly available LGPL, license or Apache license. They had to be whitelisted by legal, who checked them and verified them, because some of them, for some reason, weren't compliant with the rules they have. So I think this legal risk is still there. I'm not aware. I think that people just stopped paying attention because realized if they focus too much on it, they would, stop the progress and everyone would, be ahead of them. But I think that's one of the risks for big organizations, perhaps. So legal insecurity, these are two things from the top of my head.
Thank you very much for this panel. Thank you very much.